assignments.
No problem, no problem. All this takes time, and I'm very happy.
It's just that somehow, I mean, basically because I have to do my office work, then it is just going beyond sometimes certain things.
I know.
And because of COVID and other things, many things have become online. So there are offline and online work which literally drains you out.
I know, but I'm happy actually when I see Manish, you, and some of our regular, who are attending. You see, one thing is passing exam, but the way you people are, showing interest, discussing and all, that is our major satisfaction.
I think it is very important, and specifically this issue is going to become more and more important looking at what is happening in the world.
That's true. That's true. Only thing
and
is,
how was your trip, sir?
It was good. Swadesh also attended. I also attended. It was.
I saw your photographs.
Yes, yes. And good thing is lots of things will happen in future now, because global compact for migration is taken seriously by countries and UN system and all. So that's why all these are follow-up action.
So maybe we should also have, I was just thinking when I was looking at some of the things, I was also thinking, why should we, IGNU has so many centers all across the country also. Maybe they should also organize 1 or 2 workshops where we can bring in people locally and discuss it. From the specific, also from the more migration prone states, have one in southern India, one have in northern India, eastern India, and something like that, and actually come together at the ground level to have one workshops, so from where certain research needs emerge.
Can we do that? Very good idea. Actually, all support we have to do. Like Manish, you, Swadesh, all are very good organizer also. You have your institution. We can think of 1-day conference, then second, if it's successful, we can have more conference.
And sir, just glad to know that, ma'am, you have rightly said, in this regard, my foundation is already set up. So if you say I can organize everything, I can take care of the financial and the management aspect. So that will be, I think, useful.
See, all this what I have to do, I will take permission from university. If you have shown interest, let's Abha, me, Swadesh, all of us prepare a proposal. Okay. We may even get some funding from our own school. Okay. And this, whatever you can support, we need, if we make online, there is no finance. If we make offline, we need some support.
I think, sir, we should do an offline also, because, online, what I have realized after 3 years, now the 3rd year is running, people, they just switch on and then move out here and then, and it's somehow, I don't think so. We are getting very, very good, unless and until it's a very high level where people are very, very serious.
That's true. That's true.
And ma'am, I would like to inform you as well, as you were talking to sir about organizing an event. So like university is, yes, it has its own reputation, and if they organize, then it is more valuable. So just I was telling that I have just incorporated foundation, right? Solely focusing on international relation. So if it works out, even I can take the full responsibility of organizing the event, taking care of all the aspects, right from the planning to the execution.
Maybe we can think of both sides, internal and international, so that you can comment. Divya, Dr. Divya Balan also very good organizer. We are so many organizers here. Okay, so what we can do, we can think of that. See, good part is all of you are having your own organization and learning. So we can organize, no problem. So Divya?
Yes, sir.
6-1, I think we'll wait or we'll start. We'll start. Anyway, it is recorded.
Okay.
Okay. So we can share that. I'll introduce Divya because she has come earlier also. All of you know. And today also we have less participant, but all of you know her. She has been very active in migration discourse. Mainly she is working on West Asia and other issues also. Last almost 1 decade, including her PhD work. Right now she is in Flame University, Pune, and she has been very active in all discussion and continuously publishing in the media also. You can find lots of her article in various news, including Times of India, Hindustan Times and all. You can browse even. Okay. So she is very much, covering the issues, whatever happening across the globe. So over to Divya.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving this opportunity to share basically my research to all of you. I always feel that the best about being in academia in doing research is also not just the experience of doing research, but also that opportunity to share it with people with similar interest or scholars with similar interest. So I'm really thankful to Sahu sir for inviting me. He's like a mentor to me. And I'm sure like that's how it is for all of you. So today I'll be talking about South Asian diaspora. But before getting into the detailed discussions about who South Asian diaspora are, or what are their characteristics, cultural characteristics, their diasporic characteristics, identity, all of those questions, before getting to all that, I would like to just give you an overview of, when we talk about South Asia, what are we talking about? Like how we imagine South Asia, how we construct this notion or regional identity of South Asia. I think having that understanding is very crucial to understand the identity formation of South Asian diaspora is what I believe. So I'll try to give you a very brief idea of what South Asia is and what are the characteristics, commonalities of this place. So basically, we are talking about majorly 7 countries. Whenever we talk about South Asia, it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and also Maldives. But many a times, I have seen when scholars write about South Asia, they say 7 countries. So we can include Maldives as well. And we know that this is the home to one of the oldest civilizations, Indus Valley civilization. Also, there is a lot of commonality in terms of culture, traditions, especially when we look at, for instance, dance, music, literature, or even worship and ritual customs, etc. We'll see a lot of commonalities, and also there is a common ethnic outlook, which is there. And something which is I am always fascinated about this region is the regional languages. And it's not that these countries, these 7 or 8 countries, have their own languages, major languages, but also they have these dialects. And for instance, if you take the case of India, there are 22 languages scheduled in our constitution. So that's the kind of diversity of languages that we are talking about. But at the same time, because since we have this colonial history, especially British colonialism, English is kind of a linked language in all of these countries. So you will see that in schools, English would be either one of our major language that we study, or it's a second language. I think many of the countries it's our one of our major language of study. So that is interesting when it comes to the diversity of the region. At the same time, the commonalities and shared similarities that we are having with the countries in this particular region. And when we historically look at the region, especially from the perspective of migration, we could see that particularly one milestone that we could talk about is its colonial history, the colonial history of the region. So basically, we are talking about British colonialism, because that's the longest and far-reaching colonial rule in the region, which created the political borders of this region. I think politically, strategically, that's what is the significance when we think about migration and colonialism, because migration is, especially when we talk about international migration, it's about crossing the borders. So we can ask this question: who, who sort of designed these borders in the region? And we know that it's our colonial masters. So the creation of political borders has happened during the colonial times, and especially post-colonial independent, that time. And we could see that what we imagined that as South Asia is partly sort of unified by the colonial British colonial rule. Why I'm saying partly is also because, like, when historically, when we look at the region, we could see that Mughal rule has partly also sort of unified the region. So it's I would say Mughals and then Britain, British colonialism, that laid the foundation of how we imagine South Asia in contemporary times. Again, when we talk about unifying the region by the colonial masters or the colonial imperial powers, but we could also see that long-lasting colonial imperial rule have actually created political divisions that has resulted in conflicts, even several of the ongoing conflicts in the region. We can trace back the history to the British colonial rule. The very instance, India-Pak rivalry, or the ethnic conflict that's still in a way we could say very rife in Sri Lanka. All of this is something which we could connect to colonialism, and I think that's also core in our understanding of who these South Asian diaspora communities are. Again, many religions in the region, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity being, the major, Buddhism as well. Many languages, as I have mentioned earlier. Similarly, we could see that, even though there is this larger or an effort to unify the South Asian identity, or that South Asian regional imagination, but there is always the case of parochial nationalism within, and I could always maybe think about SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, as a regional integration project. So when we look at SARC, we could see that even though it's more like a trade, network, but because of the internal politics or the so-called parochial nationalism, the progress of the organization after so many years of its formation, it's still very slow. So even though there are attributes that we could say, that characteristics that we could say that unifies the region, but at the same time, because of the colonial rule, because of all the diversities that this region is having, and its own ethnic, religious, linguistic, political history of divide and everything, it's a very fragmented region. So you could at the same time see similarities. On the other hand, we could see fragmented existence of this whole idea of what South Asia is.
Yeah, ma'am, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you feel the future of SARC? I mean, because of Indo-Pak relation, the SARC is totally dormant right now.
Yeah.
One voice is that can India create another regional organization without Pakistan? Or what we should be doing?
No, so see, I would say, how many organizations can a region can have? Right? So SARC, we have that model. It's a functional model. The problem is, like, the integration isn't progressing, and I think it's not at all smart diplomatic move from India and other countries to form a regional organization without Pakistan. That will fail the whole idea of having regional organization without Pakistan, right? And the idea of any regional organization, regional integration, is basically regional stability and peace. So the moment we exclude Pakistan, that's going to trigger more and more conflict in the region. And we are talking about, especially when we look at India, Pakistan, we are talking about nuclear countries. So that isn't a smart move at all. But what we could do is maybe, like, having looking at the history from a more objective point of view, accepting and acknowledging that yes, partition has happened, or all of that has happened, and we have a very unsettled borders among and between these countries. But in the long term, in the long run, what is beneficial for all these countries is its progress and development and regional security. When we acknowledge that, when we objectively sort of, understand that, I think that's when there would be more progress and peace, even within SARC. But again, it's a very tricky question. We know, I mean, there is, for all of these, there is a political reason, and especially domestic politics plays a major role. And to an extent, we could see that what is reflected as our foreign policy, that has something to do with our national politics and national, even electoral politics. So sometimes, like, certain politics needs to be kept alive to get electoral gains domestically. And it's all about international narratives and national narratives and everything. It's a tricky situation. But SARC, at least my personal opinion would be, SARC isn't a failed experiment or anything. It's still functioning. The only problem or only demerit is that it's not progressing like, say, European Union.
I think is there, if you don't mind my
sure. Why not?
I think there are certain aspects of SARC is also improving, because if you look at the South Asian university which has been made, that's going on very well. Then at least in the disaster management sector, there is an internal personal relationship which is being moved to help each other out during a natural calamity. Totally. So maybe there are certain aspects of SARC where we are not able to move as well as the European Union, but there are certain parts within the gamut of SARC. There's a lot of things which have, even now, this whole concept of climate disaster resilient infrastructure which is coming up. The SARC nations are working with each other to see how they can improve the infrastructure so that the other countries don't get the dam impact is not so much. So could be, I mean, I think we may have to look at it in a broader concept then, rather just as an institution, what is being showcased to the world, rather than what is happening in smaller components.
Totally agree. And I think, it's always a better strategy to initially have that, cooperation and maybe more intense interactions in soft power areas, as you have mentioned, climate change, education, all of that, and slowly moving ahead with maybe political cooperation. And it's still a possibility. That's why I'm saying SARC isn't a failed experiment or anything. It's just that maybe a little more political commitment from all the leaders, all the 7 countries, to take it forward. I'm not saying that they are not doing anything. It's a lot of, interesting and positive interactions happening among these countries. But that commitment to take it really forward is something which I think, is the need of the hour, rather than maybe forming an organization without Pakistan. That's my take as well. But thank you so much for those questions. And I think it's a good idea that, you all can intervene in between. So that I think that will also help having a very discussion oriented conversation today. Similarly, and again coming back to like South Asia and how we imagine it, we could see that there are multiple constructions of South Asia. One being like, we, especially when we move outside the region, or even think about Indian immigrants going to these international destinations. When they are there, I have seen many a times, people identifying themselves not just with India, but also with South Asia. So, there are multiple ways in which these diaspora communities from all these South Asian countries, they identify with the region. So there is surely a sentiment of belongingness is there. And that's not just emotions that I'm talking about, but I'm also talking about some of the cultural practices. And and sometimes even this whole singular idea of South Asia as a one single civilizational entity. So there are some people who connect South Asia in that sense as one singular form of civilizational entity. Whereas at the same time, we could see that many people imagining South Asia as a very very core of diversity, or existence of diversity of features and factors, including, as I have mentioned earlier, linguistic diversity, for instance, diversity in religious practices, for instance. But at the same time, when we largely look at the region, there are these commonalities even in the practices. For instance, marriage customs. Arranged marriage is something which is very common throughout South Asia. I think that's also the reason why all those American, British-based Netflix series or OTT series about Indian communities or South Asian communities, it's very connectable to all the South Asian diaspora communities. The recent one, which I was watching, this series called Never Have I Ever. It's a teen coming to the age series. It's talking about an Indian family in US, but then even though it's about an Indian family, very specifically about an Indian family, but I'm sure Bangladeshis or Pakistanis can very well connect with it. Similarly, there is another series on Amazon Prime, I guess. It's called Little Pakistan, if I remember correctly. It's about a Pakistani family. But when we watched that, being an Indian, we could see that, oh, this is very similar. So that similarity of religious practices or culinary practices, like eating with fingers or using garam masala, khichdi and kheer is very common. Kheer is there in Sri Lanka as well. So, all of these similarities is something which is the strength of, I would say, the region, or even, salwar kameez, which is again like, a common sort of an attire for the people of South Asian origin. Another interesting feature is the whole existence of caste system. And we could see that this hierarchical nature of society is very well, we could see in almost all the South Asian countries. Especially in the case of India, it's the caste system, but also like, when we look at other areas, some other sorts of hierarchical conceptions of society is there. Patriarchy is something which we could see in all the South Asian countries, and generally what we refer to as discrimination against women at various levels, starting from home to educational institutions to workplace to politics to all the levels. So that's again something which the commonality which we can think about when we think about South Asia as an entity. Also, there are a lot of cross-border, trans-border migrations are happening in the region. So this region is constantly exchanging not just goods, at least in 2022, in this 21st century, most of the time when we talk about globalization and complex interdependence, we have a tendency to look at how much trade is happening and what is the free trade agreements, FTAs, and that's more the conversation. But we could also see that people are traveling, ideas are traveling, culture is sort of traveling. So there is a lot of trans-border movements happening. And also what is interesting about this region, South Asia, is the existence of these many trans-border populations. For instance, Punjabis in India and in Pakistan. Similarly, Kashmiris, undivided, we were all one single entity. And when partition happened, people also had to migrate. So as a result, you could see these populations spread in both the countries. When we think about Baluch people, they are in Afghanistan, they are in Pakistan, and also in Iran. Even though we are not talking about Iran, but then, so there are these existence of trans-border, transnational populations in the region. Bengalis, for instance, in West Bengal, in India, and also in Bangladesh. Tamilians in Sri Lanka and in India. So we are talking about such a very unique and interesting topography. Also, similarly, we could see that border crossing that's happening in the region. For instance, Bangladeshis or Nepali workers coming to India, and also all the other Afghans going to Pakistan, and all these intra-regional migrations that's happening, or the crossings that's happening. So when we talk about population movements, I think we have to contextualize in a way that it's not just people moving, but also culture transcending these political frontiers and borders. And that's where, again, when we look at, especially when we look at the cultural aspect of South Asia, we could see that Qawwali is something which is a pan-South Asian, cultural attribute. Similarly, Bhangra or Kathak, or, all of those dance music forms. Look at our literary culture. That literary culture is transcending borders. And for instance, 20th century, for instance, Mando stories. I think we all have read it and we sort of connect with it, because it's talking about Pakistan and partition and to an extent India. So, since we are part of that common history, we could connect with this cultural literary wealth, I would say. Similar is the case with, say, for instance, when we think about Subramanya Bharati's poems, Tamil Nadu in India and Sri Lanka. So you could see these sort of exchanges that's happening within these South Asian countries. And that's how this imagination and construction of the region is kind of, I would say, taking shape. Hollywood movies for sure is doing a lot of contribution to the construction of the identity of South Asia, especially to the non-South Asian audiences. So it is in a way providing a very common cinematic language and a very common cinematic vocabulary to the population of the larger South Asia. So we could see that when we think about South Asia, these are the ways in which we can imagine the region. Also, we can think about population density. I think except Bhutan and Maldives, rest of all the South Asian countries are densely populated, and densely populated in certain regions of the country. It's not that it's throughout evenly densely populated, but you could see that, like, sometimes even this population is dense in areas where there is, say, for more cultivatable land, because there is a lot of dependence on agriculture in these regions. Also, we could see that family sizes are larger than maybe European standards or Western American standards. There is high fertility rate in this region. India is the second largest populated country. Many of the other South Asian countries are also in the list of populated countries in the world. Something which is the wealth of asset of these countries are its young population, the younger generation, I would say, and this has also something to do with migration. So the region, the countries are densely populated. There is a substantial number of young population. Obviously, they would be looking for jobs, and we know that unemployment rate is it's comparatively higher in the region. So people will be looking ways to migrate to other parts of the world. So this has something to do with migration, the larger migration movements. Again, something which is, I would say, in the recent past, the whole process of rapid gentrification and urbanization that's happening in these regions, in these countries, that's again contributing to not just international migration, but also internal migration. So when we...
sorry, I just want to say, you have mentioned Bhutan and Sri Lanka, there is less migration. But as far as I understand, Maldives and Bhutan. Maldives have a huge migration population to the Gulf countries. And
ma'am, I said those places are less densely populated, not migration.
Okay. Sorry,
I'm talking about population. Yeah.
Right.
Especially as you have mentioned, Maldives, the largest number of domestic workers migrate to, especially to Gulf countries, GCC countries from, next to Sri Lanka, I guess, there is a lot of domestic workers migrate to foreign countries, especially GCC and other countries. Yes. But I'm talking about population. So what I'm saying is, except Bhutan and Maldives, the rest of the region is densely populated. So when population is there, especially, the density of population is higher, there would be more pressure on the resources in these countries, and people look to, ways to migrate. That's the point that I was trying to make.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. So again, when we think about South Asia, even though today we are going to talk about South Asian diaspora, but I think we should also keep in mind that there is intra-regional migration happening within the region migration, as I have mentioned, from Nepal to India, or Afghanistan to Pakistan, or Bangladesh to India. So that sort of intra-regional migration is happening. Also within countries, there is internal migration happening within, interstate migration, as we call it in India. So that is happening. Not just that, but then there is refugee movements from Afghanistan to, to Pakistan and to India, or from Bangladesh to India. So there is a lot of refugee movement as well happening. There are substantial considerable number of IDPs, or internally displaced people in the region. So in that sense, we could say that South Asian region is both an origin and destination for refugees and IDPs. So it's actually sending out as well as like, it's receiving as well. That's another interesting aspect about South Asia. There are stateless population in the region. Irregular migration is happening within the region as well as outside, international migration. Many people are smuggled and trafficked to, say, Gulf or to Europe, for instance. Irregular migration is happening. So I'm not talking about the data or the numbers. It's all available, all the years of IOM World Migration Reports, or UNHCR's refugee reports. We know the numbers. But the point here is, even though we are going to talk about international migration and diaspora largely today, but these are also the kind of migrations or different categories of mobility that's happening within the region as well as from the region. That's the first part of this conversation. So I just wanted to give you a context in imagining the region. And now I would like to move to the second part of this conversation, which is specifically on the international migration, which is from South Asian countries. And when we think about migration from South Asia, again, these categorization, I think, matters a lot. When people from this region migrate to Western countries or European countries, US, UK, Canada, or New Zealand, Australia, all of those migration, those are the people whom we mostly refer as, diaspora. And the reason is, we are talking about long-term permanent settled migration. That's the trend when we look at South Asian people moving to these countries or these part of the world. There is an option for taking up citizenship. In the case of India, we don't have dual citizenship or multi-citizenship provision. So obviously, when they take up citizenship there, their Indian citizenship ceases to exist, as you know. And ultimately, what's happening is they are going to settle down there. Settling down there, first generation, second generation, third and subsequent generation, settle there, citizens there. In India, we have this interesting OCI card and other ways in which we connect with them. But those are the people whom we refer as diaspora. Whereas South Asian migrants population going to Gulf, we mostly call them temporary migrants and also expatriates. But about expatriates, there is again sort of a dialogue whether expatriates are elite migrants in the Gulf region, in the GCC countries, Or can we call expatriates to all, like, blue collar and white collar migrants in the Gulf countries? But wherever that conversation is going, mostly we call them either temporary migrants in Gulf or expatriates, expatriate communities in Gulf, but not diaspora. So which also means that in today's conversation, my conversation with you, I'll be focusing on South Asian population migrating to the Western and European world, not to the GCC countries, because we are specifically talking about diaspora.
Sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the lines just now you said about the diaspora?
Yeah, so diaspora is basically the term which we use. These are all about, like, the terminologies. We can always say that terminologies doesn't really matter. It's all about, like, the people and the idea of migration. But I think from an academic point of view, and I'm talking about this from a social science point of view, we could see that some of these terminologies help us better understand the kind of the category of migration that we are talking about. So
sorry to interrupt you once again.
Yeah,
there was a technical error. I did not hear you.
Okay.
Am
I audible now?
Where you said diaspora and the GCC countries, I mean, are not considered as diaspora. They are migrants. So can you clarify that point?
Yeah. So basically, that's because the point here is citizenship. We use the term diaspora majorly for those communities who have permanently settled in their destination countries. We're talking about long-term permanent migration. So what is happening is, if, for instance, somebody from here migrating to, say, UK, they go there, they settle there, they take up citizenship there, they will be having their second, third, and subsequent generation there. Those are the people whom we usually in diaspora studies, we term them diaspora. But in the case of migration to the Gulf countries, to the GCC countries, we mostly refer them as expatriates or temporary migrants, because there is no provision for citizenship, even though, I mean, currently we are talking about golden visa and long-term visas and everything, residence visa and everything, but then it's not equivalent to taking up citizenship. Kafala system is, many of those Gulf countries are re-looking at the Kafala sponsorship system, but still that's something which is largely like, the people from South Asian region going to Gulf on a contract, on a labor contract. And, the understanding is that this is not a permanent migration, but a contractual temporary migration, even though it could be long-term. Like I have myself interviewed people who are in Gulf for, say, 30, 40 years. So there is always that question, why are we not calling them diaspora then? Because, they are there for so many years. But conceptually, and from an academic point, purely an academic point of view, from the diaspora studies point of view, the term, these are differences in terminologies, as I mentioned. Most of the time for the Gulf migrants from South Asian region, we call them either expatriates or temporary migrants, not really diaspora. We can call them diaspora. I have seen, like, scholars calling them diaspora as well, which is no wrong in calling them, but the only thing is then we have to explain why and the reasons why we are calling them diaspora, explaining them that, okay, there is a long-term sort of existence in Gulf countries. They also connect with home country, the return or coming to vacation, contributing to the home country through remittances. It's possible. But what I'm saying,
ma'am, there is another thing. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem at all.
I may forget the question. That's why. Like you said, diaspora and we are Gulf migrants.
Yeah.
When it comes to the policy,
yeah.
So the diaspora policies are really applicable for us also. I mean,
yes. So that's another thing. That's another interesting thing.
No
exactly. So that's why I said. That's why I specifically said from an academic point of view, not from a policy point of view. So so many times, whatever understanding academicians are having or social scientists are having, that might not be aligning with the policy circles. So, when we talk about immigration policy or diaspora connect policy, all Indian origin people are included in that, which means Gulf migrants would be included in that. South Asian, Indian diaspora in all of those other countries, Western and European countries, are included in that. What I'm talking about is from the academic point of view, because when you read, for instance, some of these literature on diaspora studies, you will see that diaspora is mostly used to refer Indians or West Asian communities in the West and Europe because of the citizenship option. So I just wanted to point out that there is this difference. One group of migrants from South Asia going to the Western European countries, they can have the option of taking up citizenship. And when they take up citizenship in those countries, they settle down there. There are multiple generations that we talk about, and all the rest of the conversations associated with it. But when we talk about migration to Gulf, the conversation is about temporary migration, the transient nature of migration, that the Gulf migrants have to come back at some point of time. Most of these Gulf countries, I think, have the age limit also 60 years. I'm not so sure about that particular, if there is a policy like that, but I think
yes, recently it was 60, implemented in Kuwait.
60,
and
right?
for certain categories are allowed up to 65 also.
Exactly.
But most of them are 60.
Yeah, so that transience is what I'm trying to highlight. So it's a good idea to use certain terminologies so that the meaning can be easily conveyed. Expatriate, the term, or temporary migrants, the term, is suggesting that they are transient. This migration is contractual, because the moment we say that, we are also highlighting the issues of labor rights violations, wage theft issues. We are also highlighting all the issues associated with the kafala system. We are also highlighting the need for reintegration and return policies in home countries. For instance, somebody going to US and settling down there, maybe the home country might not have to really think about them returning and reintegrating them. But we know that those people who are going to the Gulf countries at some point of time will be coming back to India or Sri Lanka or Nepal or all of these places. So which means also what we need, return and reintegration policies.
For example, man, during the Kuwait war, the government has to really
91,
take care of them when they were returning.
Yeah.
And they have, because they are Indian citizens, they have to return. They have right to return here anytime.
Exactly. And also think about much more from the recent past, COVID time. Millions of people have come back to India in that Vande Bharat flight. And how much prepared we were. Some of the states were prepared, some of the states weren't prepared. There was no uniformity in policies in that sense in India, right? We are talking about 28 countries and 8 union territories. All of them have different approaches to all of this. But the point here is, if we don't highlight the transient nature of Gulf migration, maybe we might not be able to highlight the need for reintegration and return and reintegration policies. And it's very important because, and again, migration experiences would be different for those migrating to Western and European countries and those migrating to Gulf countries, because these are two different systems. In the sense that, even the labor systems are different. I have already mentioned that citizenship regime is totally different. Visa regime is totally different. Look at the pattern of migration. Majorly, skilled migrants go to Western and European countries. You will see majority of unskilled, not unskilled, sorry to use that term, but low-skilled, semi-skilled laborers go to Gulf countries. So, all these variations, it's a good idea to, rather than using diaspora as a blanket term, we can also highlight these issues by using terminologies creatively, is my point. I hope it's clear. Also, right now, I'm not looking at the chat. let me look at it once I, towards the end of the conversation. Sorry for that, but I'll be surely addressing. I think there are some comments or questions there. I'll surely take a look at it. Yeah. So returning back to what I was talking about. So when we think about South Asia, we have to think about people migrating to all these different parts of the world, and also to Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia and Singapore, for instance. Substantial, considerable number of people are migrating to Malaysia and Singapore in almost all levels of employment, both skilled and low skilled and semi-skilled. So all of this is what we are talking about, and why I'm saying this is just to kind of give you an idea the complexity of the region, the intensity of the conversation, migration related conversation that's happening in the region, South Asia as a region. That's the whole point. Something which we always, in connection with migration, when we think about South Asia, remittances come to our conversation, and we know that there is a positive correlation between remittances and development. There is no denying to that. And also, as I have just mentioned, when we think about South Asians in all these countries, international destinations, whether they're going to come back or not coming back, taking up citizenship, settled somewhere else, but still, I think it's very important, very crucial, critical to have return and reintegration policies. And that's also something which COVID-19 pandemic, that time, that 2 years have sort of, highlighted the need for such policies. And again, when we look at the region, we could see that those who have returned during the pandemic, especially from the West Asian countries, the GCC Gulf countries, those who are between the age of 20 to say 40, they are trying to remigrate. They are either trying to remigrate to back to the Gulf countries or elsewhere. Which means what? There is no end to migration from this region, not just from this region, but also within this region. So there is going to be always this phenomenon of international, intra-regional, and internal migration that's going to be the core political, social, demographical, ecological aspect of this region. So migration can't be separated from the idea and imagination of what South Asia is. Many a times, and why I'm stressing this is my own background is international studies. So in international studies, the moment we talk about South Asia, we talk about SAARC, we talk about intra-regional trade, we talk about all the political border related issues or water sharing issues, and that significance given to population movements is something I would say much lesser than maybe the core political areas and economic trade related areas. So that's why I'm stressing that for this region, migration is very significant. Not just that it's sending so many people outside of the region, but also because of all the migration population movement that's happening within the region among the South Asian countries. When we look at the history of migration from South Asia, the major phase that we always, or phases that we always highlight, is the 19th century colonial phase, where indentured labor migration was happening, and the 20th century, which is post-independent phase of migration, where people from this region migrated to UK or rest of all over the world. So these are the two phases that we always highlight. But when we go a little bit back to the history, we could see that even before colonial migrations were happening, there is a lot of trade related movement from the region, because Arabs were doing trade with us, spices, and all that, caravan routes and the sea routes. At that point of time, people were actually moving. So from the coastal region of India to say Yemen, there are some records that I have seen or I have read that first Indian migration to the Gulf region was to Yemen for trade, and to rest of all the part of the world. So when we imagine South Asian migration from a historical point of view, we can think beyond 19th century, we can think beyond 19th century, that we could be thinking about then trade related movements and migrations. Not necessarily that phase of migration be permanent, people going somewhere, say for instance as part of pearl trade. Gulf countries were the center of pearl trade at one point of time, and somebody from say India going to that part of the world might not be settling down there, but a lot of movement was happening. Population movements were happening, migration were happening. Some settled as well. There is record saying that the first Indian community or in Indian subcontinent community in the Gulf countries were Betras from the undivided Sindh and Gujarat region. So, when we look at history, we could see that even before colonial time, these population movements were very much there active. But specifically, when we look at the history, the recent history of migration from South Asia, it's 19th century colonial migration and 20th century post-colonial migration. And when we think about push and pull factors, because whenever we think about migration, we think in terms of push and pull or the reasons for migration, why people migrate. I think that's $1 million question that we always pose: why are we migrating, or why are we returning? Why are we not returning? So many of such questions. So we could see that at that point of time, historically, when we look at colonial times, all those difficulties that they were facing at home, poverty, famines, all of this were reasons why people migrated at that point of time in search of better livelihood. Which means what? There is a continuity in reasons of migration. Still, people are migrating for bettering their life. For work, for sure, for study, for sure, but ultimately, what is the the end point where everybody wants to attain? That's better living condition for himself, for herself, or for their family. So this is again, we can see that there is a continuity in the reasons for migration. Just to give you an overview of the history, which I am sure you all would be knowing already. But when we think about indentured labor, that's from 1834 to 1970, which is end of First World War. And it's interesting, indentured labor system was established or was sort of introduced after the abolition of slavery. So the whole Atlantic slave trade, so that's larger migration history from African countries to Americas, that was happening, and slavery was abolished. There was a need for labor in especially the colonies, in the sugar, cotton, tea plantations in the colonies, for railroad construction projects, and slaves were no longer available because slavery was abolished, and the independent people, they weren't ready to work for lower wages. So the colonial imperial powers, they came up with this idea of establishing or introducing this indentured labor system. Coolie was a very derogatory term used to denote indentured laborers. This was introduced in 1834, even though according to the colonial policy accounts, this is a contractual labor system. It's not a forced, is what they said. It's not slavery, is what they said. But when we look at the actual, sort of how this whole indentured labor system pans out in that 19th and 20th century, early 20th century, we could see that that's kind of an extension of slavery. It was bonded labor. Your contract is for, I think initially for 5 years. That's the contract that you sign. And, the contract, whatever the terms and conditions in the contract, in the indentured labor contract, that was never sort of complied with. For instance, I can give you some examples. In fact, I really would love to give you some web links that you could refer to for all the, those are the wealth of resources that we are having in our archives. Many of the universities have these oral history projects related to indentured labor system and so on. So I'll share that list of archives which you could look at. But again, at least the critical understanding of indentured labor system is that it's a kind of a reinvention of slavery. It was bonded like labor, as I have mentioned. There are these recruitment agents who are engaging in many of the the fraudulent practices. For instance, sometimes what they sort of give misinformation about the kind of work. They were forced to, these laborers were forced to sign the contract even at times. Looking at again, we are talking about that period of time, 19th century. So we could see that illiteracy was a major issue at that point of time. That was a social evil. And people weren't able to read and understand the terms and conditions in the indentured labor contracts. So it was the agents who were telling them that, okay, this is the kind of work you have to do. This is the wage that you will be getting. And, this is just a 2 days travel in the ship. Whereas the travel itself, the ship travel itself take, say, 15 to 20 days. And once they are in the colonies, in the plantations, that's when they realize that the wage that is promised and what they are getting are not the same. So many of them were cheated in that sense. They were tricked to sign the contract. Some were forced to, take the trip along with the family, even kidnapping. So there are accounts of people kidnapped by these agents for the indentured labor setup. So this is the kind of indentured, system that we are talking about, and that's the reason why critics say that there is an element of force there. There is an element of it's kind of slavery 2.0. Is what many of the critics are when they discuss indentured labor. That's what they are saying. So as I have mentioned, during the travel, many died on board, on ship due to several of these diseases. Also, death was very rampant when they reached the land in the holding depot, where their numbers, they are registered as laborers. So in that holding depot, it's like a camp, I could say. There were many instances of death happening there. Also, this is, you are sending these South Asian people to, say, to the Southeast Asian countries or to Caribbean countries where the climate would be totally different, or to Africa where the climate would be totally different. So that during the period of acclimatization, where you get adjusted to the climatic conditions and trust everything, again, you could see that the deaths were, that's due to diseases and unbearable climatic conditions that were happening. When it comes to working in the plantation or rail construction sector, the working hours were long. Situation were really harsh, and there are these archival records that is saying that even when there is storms or flood or whatever that is happening, these indentured laborers were forced to work even in those conditions. So it was harsh working conditions, long working hours, really low wages as against what is promised to them when signing the contract. Children were supposed to work, those above 5 years of age, because again, we know that indentured labor was a family migration setup. It was more like, the whole family migrating to these places. So children would be with, these families, and they are supposed to work as well if they are above 5 years of age. Punished for even the smallest of the mistakes, or what to say, their interactions or their whatever, and also if somebody tries to escape from the plantation, from wherever they are working, their working camp, either they will be imprisoned or their contract will be extended for another 5 years. So the initial contract is signed for 5 years, but if you try to escape, that contract itself will be extended unilaterally for, say, another 5 to 15 years, which means you won't be able to go back to your home country. So this is the indentured labor phase of migration of the South Asian people. Some people, they returned at the end of their contract. Many chose not to return. And those are the first generation South Asians in many of these countries, like in Suriname or in East Africa. You know, the Indians there, it's they are the first generation Indians. But what is again interesting when we look at the South Asian community all over the, you know, especially since we are talking about colonial times, in those colonial, earlier colonial setups, we could see that those colonies also got their independence around 60s and 70s. Say, I can think about East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. Uganda, Idi Amin came to power in 1970s, 72, if I remember correctly. And his first political policy was to expel all the Indians or South Asians from Uganda. So he has given them 3 days to just leave the country, or yeah, some shorter time period to leave the country. Many returned back to their home country, India. But many decided not to return back to India, but instead they migrated to UK. And you could see that the history says that those people who have migrated from say, India to East Africa, to Uganda, for instance, from there, post-independence of Uganda, they migrated to UK. From UK, they migrated to United States of America. I'm just giving you an example. So, you know, this phenomenon is what is called twice migration, or say thrice migration. So migrations are also in that sense, like, you know, it's not just one linear travel from here to UK. No. So, you know, you could see that there are these communities as well who from India migrated to these colonies at that point of time, from there to the imperial home, which is Britain, from Britain to say US or Canada. So we can call it step migration. Paraminder Bachu, in his book about Sikhs who migrated from India to Eastern African countries, then to UK and US, he has used this interesting term, twice migration. So I think twice migration is a very creative again, you know, terminology to denote these multiple stages of migration of South Asians. Similarly, you could see that those people who have migrated to say Suriname to work in the sugar plantations there, from there they migrated to Netherlands. So in Netherlands, there are actually 2 Indian communities. They are all Indian communities, but then you could see that, you know, there is a culturally, there is a unique nuance difference between these Suriname Indians in Netherlands. They are called Hindustani Indians, and also Indians who migrated directly from India, which is a much later migration that has happened. So think about it, when we talk about South Asian migrants or South Asian diaspora, it's a very complex diaspora that we are talking about. It's a very diverse community that we are talking about, and that's the reason why Bhikkhu Parekh, a very well-known migration scholar and diaspora scholar, when he was specifically talking about Indian community, he said that Indian community is a community of community. So there are multiple communities within the Indian community, and not just on the basis of caste or religion or language or, you know, regionalism, subnationalism, but also in terms of whether they are twice migrants or thrice migrants, or, you know, all of this matters. And I think that's what make diaspora studies really exciting for scholars, researchers like us. It's this dynamism and this intensity and multiplicity of layers of understanding them is what makes it really interesting. Just to again, when we look at from the endangered or 19th century migration to when we look at the 20th century migration of South Asians, we could see that independence triggered migration, partition related migration, decolonization related migration that has happened, especially from Indian side, Pakistan, later Bangladesh, migration was happening. Similarly, in the 20th century, we could see that a considerable number of people from South Asia, they migrate to United States of America or Australia or New Zealand, and that's something to do with the development in those regions. America becoming an industrial power or a political power, and there was labor demand for sure in all of those economies because of the industrial development that is happening there. Similarly, we could see that in Europe, South Asians were migrating to Europe for responding to the labor demand for post-war reconstruction. So it was after Second World War, America was giving money to the European countries to rebuild the country, not just America, but also Bretton Woods institutions at that time, IMF and World Bank, and so there was a lot of constructions happening in the infrastructural labor demand was there. So responding to that labor demand, many South Asians have migrated to Europe at that point of time. We could see that countries of Southeast Asia were industrializing during that time, early mid 20th century, like Thailand or Malaysia or Hong Kong or Singapore. So in South Asian people were migrating to those regions as well. When we look at Sri Lanka, we can think about that long 30 years of civil war and people in fact fleeing. Because when we talk about civil war, it's not about people voluntarily migrating. More than an economic migration, that was a refugee movement. And we in India host a considerable number of Sri Lankan refugees, especially in the Tamil Nadu. I think there are 105 refugee camps, Sri Lankan Tamil refugee camps in Tamil Nadu, right? And 5 high security camps, if I remember the numbers correctly. But so there was this, so they were not just coming to India, but also Sri Lankan Tamilians were migrating to France and Italy and UK, and so this refugee movement was also happening from the region in the 20th century. Similarly, movement to Canada, Australia in the 60s. USSR invasion of Afghanistan triggered a lot of considerable significant population movement from Afghanistan, but that's not just the end of movement from Afghanistan, but also we could see that the protracted political instability since the Cold War and recently in the recent past, Taliban coming to power and people trying to flee the country. So it's a very volatile political system that we are witnessing in the region. So my core point is, during the 20th century, it wasn't all the movements weren't labor movements. All the movements were in voluntary movements. There was refugee movements also happening from the region. Majorly again, but then the focus goes to voluntary economic movements. People migrated for work. 1970s, 60s, 70s, again, we know that that's the time of Gulf oil boom, where substantial population from South Asia migrated to the Gulf countries. And again, in Gulf, we could see that 2-3 generations of South Asians in the 6 GCC countries. So this is kind of an overview of the migration from the South Asian region. And it's a very diverse flow. When we look at, I would say this is the only map I could find. But this is a very simplistic depiction of the migration flow, but it's a very dynamic, complex migration corridor that we are talking about in terms of from South Asia to rest of everywhere in the world. In that sense, we could see that there are certain international destinations which are the hotbed of South Asian migration. For instance, again, as I mentioned, like the Gulf states or UK, for instance, or US, for instance. But but that doesn't mean that that's not the only places where these people are migrating to. It's a very diverse migration corridor. And again, depending on which country within South Asia that we are talking about, again the pattern and trend changes. So the migration from India it's not very similar to maybe migration from Nepal to some of these countries. So within country or country wise also, there is a lot of continuity and dissimilarities as well. It's a very diverse migration corridor, when we look at South Asia as a region. And I think that's one reason why whenever we talk about policies, let me also talk about policies. That's when we could say that we could see that in fact there is a lot of diversity in policies as well. Say for instance, Sri Lanka is better managing its domestic worker migration stream compared to India. Nepal is having its own very diverse system, which is, sometimes even the civil society organizations say that it's better than India's system. We in India, we have an Immigration Act, which soon will be replaced by a new act, hopefully. Also, at the same time, we don't have a return reintegration policy. So there is a lot of diversity within the region. There is commonality, there is continuity, at the same time there is a lot of diversity as well. I'll be sharing the PPT with all of you, and these are some of the sources where you can look at to read on the history of South Asian migration to different parts of the world. And these are very interesting archives. There are oral history sections in some of these archives, and when you read the stories, when you read, the life histories of these people who have undertaken that migration to all these parts of the world, I think, again, we could, migration experiences would be different, as we are talking about change in generations and change in, the era. But still, there are certain emotions which are, you will find in the historical times and even among the contemporary migrants. For instance, their connect with home, or the emotion that is home, the idea that is home, or nostalgia, for instance, myth of return, for instance. So I think, when you go through these archival, sources, links, it is going to be a really, exciting study that you all will be doing, is what I believe. So I'll be sharing this with you. Coming to the reasons for migration, I don't think I have to explain this. It's push and pull factors. It's always again something which we have earlier also discussed when I was discussing the one of the previous sessions with all of you. But we could see that when we talk about South Asia, something which is which we should be highlighting is this conflict, political instability in the region, violence that's there, or repression, other than poverty or unemployment or all of those reasons. So political instability in a way is also contributing a lot of migration. Currently, also we talk about environmental induced or climate change induced migration. And some of the major countries that we could think about when we think about climate change induced migration, Pakistan or Bangladesh or Afghanistan, especially the coastal region of Bangladesh where sea level is rising. So environmental disasters and natural calamities and climate change induced migration is also happening at a higher rate from this region. I just wanted to give you a comprehensive understanding of the migration from the region. So these are the various migration streams, as I have mentioned. These are the various factors of migration, as I have explained. And now we'll focus on the diaspora. So specifically the South Asian diaspora. But before going to that, because this is going to be the last session of the conversation, but before that, let me ask you if there is anything that I should explain, or should we discuss anything at this point? I hope everything all is well.
Yeah, sure. I think we can.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. So then the third part is of this conversation is specifically looking at diaspora. You might have already had that session on diaspora, but just to give you again, when we talk about diaspora, I think it's a good idea to contextualize what we are talking about. As you know, initially the term was, so this is a very contested term, just like, we had that discussion in the first part of this conversation about diaspora and expatriates, those very terminologies. Similarly, diaspora is a very contested term. In fact, like, there are multiple, there are very many scholars who is trying to define it. And diaspora now has become a term which is very difficult to define because of the inclusion of, I would say, categories of people, migrant communities that we have incorporated in the term diaspora initially. But then, when we look at the evolution of the term diaspora, we could see that it was a very symbolistic sort of understanding that diaspora, basically, we are talking about Jewish community who have and their experiences of exile is what is the initial meaning of the term diaspora. So that I mean, literal meaning is to scatter or disperse, and the whole idea of this diaspora, the term diaspora, expanded over time from initially talking about denoting the Jewish experience of exile to including dispersion of Africans. So Africans as part of transatlantic trade, as I have mentioned earlier, during the period of slavery, or Armenians migrating, or Irish migration, associated with potato famine, for instance. So we started including more communities, more migrant communities within this term of diaspora, thus expanded the very meaning of the term. Even Palestinians were, included as victim diaspora. There is a term called victim diaspora, and Palestinians is one of the victim diaspora, is what academicians are trying to sort of conceptualizing. So from just to refer to Jewish migration to include all the other migrant communities, that is the evolution that has happened to this concept. But there are, again, as I mentioned, there are commonalities of experiences. For instance, when we think about Jewish diaspora, when we think about Africans during the transatlantic trade, or Armenians or Palestinians for that matter, one commonality is, it's not just distress, but also some from the past. There is a traumatic incident that's forcing all of them to leave the country at that point of time, historically, when we look at the term. So the memory of, common memory, collective memory of trauma, or collective consciousness of being displaced from the home. So, all these terms which we use in diaspora studies, displaced, dislocated, or, exiled, all of this is exodus, for instance. All the terms that we could think about, this is the historical context of, we using these terms in diaspora studies. And again, something which I personally is very much interested in the concept of home within the study of diaspora communities or migrant communities, for that matter. So, for any, even contemporary migrant communities that we look at, home is like the promised land. You might have migrated from home for various reasons, including distress. Maybe there might be unemployment. There might be, other reasons why you have migrated. Even for student migrants, one of the reasons why, when I ask my students at Flame University, and they are all planning to migrate to foreign countries, to US, Canada, for their master's studies and PhD and all the other courses, whatever they are planning to do. So I ask them, why do you want to migrate in the first instance? So they say that, Indian educational institutions is something which they want to enroll for their master's or PhD, and they are saying that that international exposure isn't there in India. So there could be many reasons for people to migrate, even that's for study or that's for work or for whatever the reasons are. So that element of distress is there in that sense when we think about migration, but still you sort of connect with home. You consider home as your promised land, and you always wanted to return back. As in the case of diaspora communities, return is more a myth of return because maybe their grandchildren, they don't want to move back to their home countries, or maybe for various reasons they might be postponing their return at their whatever age, retirement age. But there is always this feeling that this idea of or feeling of return is there. In the case of Gulf migrants, that's not a myth of return. That's a surety of return. There is a certainty of return. They have to return. So, that returning to where is what is home all about. Returning to home is hence a major defining factor of understanding diaspora. And how are you relating, connecting to home? When we think about diaspora, how diasporas connect with home? It could be memories. It could be their, shared collective networks. For instance, Indian associations in these countries, or Afghan associations in these countries, Sri Lankan Tamil, associations in these countries. When they are, when they are together, when they have this collective, whatever forum they are having, what is happening is, other than not just celebrating these festivals of, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, you're about to say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Regarding victim diaspora, do we have Indian diaspora also, which is considered as victim diaspora?
Yeah. So
and
during the time of Khalistan movement, and also partition, even before Khalistan movement, partition diaspora was considered as victim diaspora in some of the scholarships.
Totally, how many victim diasporas are existed?
Okay, I can't give you an exact number, but for instance, Jewish, Palestinians, partition migrants from India and Pakistan, all of these. So basically, the idea of being a victim or a victim diaspora is you are forced to migrate. One that is the definition. You're forced to migrate from your country. You're displaced, forcefully displaced, and there is a traumatic event. So, for instance, when we think about Sri Lankan Tamilians, they are a victim diaspora. They comes within the definition of victim diaspora because there is a traumatic incident memory that that they still sort of retell and revive in their diaspora existence. So that is the connection with these communities being a victim diaspora. These are all again just terminologies, help us to better understand different categories of migrants. What is behind victim diaspora is these two: forcefully displaced, dislocated, traumatic event from the past.
But when it comes to Indian diaspora, as you said, partition, like India-Pakistan partition, but India never forced their people to leave the country.
Yeah, so India
with their own will.
Exactly. But then,
so how they become victim diaspora?
So it's not that government might not be saying that you have to move from India to Pakistan. But what is the larger social situation at that point of time? Think about it. All your relatives are leaving the country. All your friends are leaving the country. Your community is migrating to say Pakistan, or from Pakistan to India. That's kind of a pressure for you also to decide whether to migrate or not. Choice is there. I totally agree that choice is there, but still this is happening out of partition, which wasn't something which they it wasn't voluntary in that sense. The whole idea of partition and creating, even though that's a political project, but the whole migration movement that has population movement that has happened between India and Pakistan, both ways, that wasn't something which the common people were were planned, or it was a lot of that's why when we talk about still partition and partition related movement, there is a lot of emotions involved in it. Somebody's family home at Pakistan, Karachi, and all of those stories. So that is it's out of the larger colonial rule and the independence and British policy of frontier building and everything. There is a historical reasons and context to all of this, but for the people there is a traumatic experience there, and the traumatic experience is something which isn't or even as I told you, even though there is a choice, Sometimes you exercise your choice out of the pressure, because everybody that you know is migrating either to Pakistan or from Pakistan to India. So obviously the question will come whether I should stay back. Is it safe for me to stay back? The partition was associated, that part of our history, partition history, was also the history of ethnic riots and civil riots. We are talking about, bloody riots that has happened at that point of time. It wasn't easy. In fact, I have read this book, the Other Side of Silence by Urvashi Bhutalia. Ma'am, if you haven't, you should read that book. And the emotions and what they have gone through, especially women, moving both sides, in fact, to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India, the rape and other abuses that they had to go through. So there is that, that memory of, or I would say collective memory of trauma, is something which makes some communities victim diaspora communities.
Ma'am, I have one trending question right now for you.
Sure.
We don't have access to get the books over here. So that's why our knowledge is very limited. And thanks to internet, at least we got the opportunity to
so what I could do is
books.
also, if I have a soft copy, I have to look at whether I'm having a soft copy or not. If I'm having a soft copy, I'll surely share with you. But otherwise, you can order these days, right?
But there are certain restrictions in this country.
Okay.
So we are like tied, as you said, migrants.
Yeah, but surely, I think what we could do is there are these reviews available online for sure. If not the whole, so just go through it. And also, that archives that I have, the link that I have incorporated in this slide, many of those archival records are having so many of these accounts, how much they have, the experiences of migration during that time, even partition. So basically, my point is, when there is traumatic incident involved in the whole dislocation and displacement, that's when we call such diaspora victim diaspora.
Ma'am, another question. When the states were formed in India, all the people were asked to go to their places, it's not official, but unofficially, people belongs to particular language and ethnics. They were asked to go to their own states like Karnataka, Maharashtra and all. And even recently, late 90s or 2000 revolts or other social political things, you all might be more updated than us. So you can see here also that victim card is played. It is going on. So how do you take this, how you look into this point?
Yeah, so I think, what is important is we have to contextualize, because say for instance, many of the contemporary movements, we can actually include movements within this idea of victim diaspora or victim migration. Basically, we have to contextualize, we have to look at the factors that is triggering such movements and the political narrative around such movements. Again, that's very important. What media is portraying, what is the public conversation about such movements and all of that. I think, when we contextualize the movements in a wider political, social, even economic manner, that is when we understand the multifaceted nature of any movement for that matter. And then I would say, then the interesting factor is that we could actually call, say, a voluntary migrant an involuntary migrant, or a victim diaspora. So these terms, even though terminologies are important for social scientists and academicians and especially those who are doing research in these areas, but we also have to understand that these aren't watertight compartments. There is a lot of fluidity in all the concepts that we are talking about. Say, for instance, we say that home home sweet home, but home isn't sweet for all, everybody. We tend to generalize, and that's when I say that home is the promised land for all these diaspora. But sometimes if not everybody attach such positive images to home. So there is a lot of fluidity in all of these concepts. That's also something which I think we have to keep in mind. But there are certain things which we obviously could generalize, as I have mentioned, like myth of return, or that diaspora contribution to the home countries in terms of remittances, in terms of not just economic remittances, but also cultural remittances. We talk about knowledge remittances these days. For instance, many high-skilled or educated Indians migrating to these countries, and they take up high-skilled jobs in those countries and update their skills. So once they update their skill, they are contributing to the development of India, not just monetarily, money-wise, but also in terms of the exchange of knowledge. So knowledge remittances is another way in which we can think about all these diaspora communities. I think the idea is to contextualize them. Yeah. So as I mentioned, this is a very diaspora as a concept is an evolving concept. And when we think about, again, this is something which I have discussed already, there are many categories, many terminologies, many subcategories. But the idea is basically when we talk about diaspora, just to sort of, give an overview, it's about that link with home. The desire to go back to home, the nostalgic memories of home, the diasporic imagination, as we call it. There is this interesting, again, a book by Salman Rushdie, published in 1991. The title of the book is Imaginary Homelands. So it's about how we imagine very idealized notions of home. So when we are, for instance, when we are away from home, like I'm in Pune right now, and last month was Onam, the festival, and I was missing everything about home, and that might not be so. When I was actually at home before, during the Onam time, there wasn't any celebration. But when I'm very much away from home, I'm having this feeling that, oh, if I'm at home, I would have done this. I would be having a proper sadhya. So, you imagine, you idealize your home in your head. And that's what many a times migrants, diasporic communities, what they do. And that is the connect that they are having with, when I say home, it's not just your physical home, but also the home country, like India, for instance. Even subnational identity matters there. If you are a Kannadiga, your home would be also Karnataka state, or wherever you are from, maybe from Bangalore, or whichever part of the state you are from. So there is nationalism, there is subnationalism, all of that is there. So it's a very multi-layered understanding of diaspora and migrant experiences. Major readings that you have to do to understand diaspora is William Safran's work, also Robin Cohen's work. So these two work is what is the core of understanding diaspora. There are many, it's a wealth of literature that we are having in this area. But I think, these two are must reads for us. And he's talking about, what I have explained until now. It's about, that imagination and everything. The question of belongingness becomes very interesting when we look at South Asian diaspora. As I have mentioned, twice migrated diaspora. When you ask which is your home, sometimes they might say that Suriname is my home. Even though Indian origin, but Suriname, there are communities, people who connect, especially, if Suriname Indians are in Netherlands. And when you ask them what is your immediate belongingness, that feeling of belongingness is, they would be saying Suriname. Or, when you ask this question to second generation, third generation, fourth generation, your identity, your belongingness, you will get multiple explanations. So we are talking about these varied identities, multiple loyalties, All of this is what migrants, or diaspora communities unique in our understanding. TCIs are third country individuals. That's basically a term to denote second and subsequent generations who are born and brought up in a foreign international destination or host country, host society. So that's third country individuals. Now coming to specifically to this question of transnationalism. When we talk about diaspora, we cannot miss diaspora transnationalism. It's all about you linking back to your home country. In fact, this has become a major catchphrase post 1990s with globalization, especially in the current times. We all have social media. We are constantly in touch with our home country, for that matter. Maybe this might not be the situation in 1950s or 60s, where the connect wasn't this intense. Right now, with globalization, with that time-space compression that has happened, we are constantly in touch with our multiple homes and multiple migration destinations. And people aren't migrating just to one destination anymore. People are circular, we say that these days it's more circular migration. People really, they are very mobile. Somebody will go from this country to, say, Republic of Ireland sometimes for a training. From there they go to Germany, they settle, they sort of live in Germany for 5 to 10 years, and then they migrate to UK. From UK, if they get a better opportunity in Canada, they go there. So a lot of these sort of movements are happening, which is something very I would say contemporary. Many of these also countries, both home countries and destination countries, are talking about citizenship, multiple citizenship, dual citizenship, etc., etc. But when we look at diaspora communities, South Asian diaspora communities, we could see that there is multiple identities. They are living sometimes dual and multi lives, multicultural lives. They are speaking multiple languages. The language of the country, their destination country, as well as their home country languages. They would be maintaining homes at different places. They might have bought a house in their destination. They might be having an ancestral home back in Afghanistan or in India. So, they maintain multiple houses. They are in regular touch with their extended family members, friends back home. They do come for vacations. Also, they contribute to the country as not just as FDIs or remittances, but as I have mentioned, cultural remittances. Diaspora contribute much more than anyone else to philanthropic activities. They contribute hugely to religious festivals and charity activities and investment in education, medical. This is the contribution that diaspora communities and migrant communities are making to their home countries. They fund election campaigns. They fund, for instance, when flood or other natural calamities happens, these communities, they mobilize funds for rebuilding the home country, their home. So all of this happens, and that is what is diaspora transnationalism in multiple ways. When they connect with their home country, that is what is diaspora transnationalism. Question of multiculturalism hence become very important when we discuss diaspora. The question of whether their loyalty, where belongs their loyalty. Almost all the major destinations have asked this question. Are you really, belong to us, even though you have taken a citizenship? This is the question of integration. This is the question of so-called assimilation. For instance, in US, the policy was more of assimilation. You come to America, you assimilate to the American society. In the Europe, it was more about multiculturalism. You come to Europe and you contribute to the society. In your private space, you can have your own culture and practices, religious practices and customs and rituals. That is the idea of multiculturalism. So, it's also about when we think about diaspora or diaspora communities, be it be South Asian or African or any diaspora communities for that matter, the questions of multiculturalism becomes important. The question of integration become important. The question of, especially post 9/11, the World Trade Center attack, the question of security, or rather migrants and diaspora being, threats to security. This is a major narrative that we are exposed to post 9/11. So the securitization of migration has happened. Securitization of diaspora has happened. For instance, South Asian diaspora is many a times, targeted for due to the Islamophobic tendencies in some of these countries. There is racial profiling, instances of racial profiling, instances of xenophobic attitudes towards migrant communities. All of this is there. So, when you think about everyday experiences of migrants, everyday experiences of diaspora communities, all of this is part of their life. All of this is part of their migrant existence. And that is where I think, just to give you sort of, whatever I have discussed so far, and this is the concluding part of it, I just wanted to discuss one case study so that whatever we discuss so far, you can contextualize. And that is Indian community. I think I am assuming that all of you in this session are Indians, is what I'm thinking. So that's why I thought, I'll talk about Indian diaspora. So many a times Indian diaspora.
Divya,
Yeah.
just a request. We have another meeting actually.
Sure, sir. I'm just winding it up. Yeah. So, when we think about Indian diaspora, that is one diaspora which is, considered as or praised as model community. And we could see that among the Indian diaspora, there is always this presence of first generation of migrants. People are migrating, so there is always fresh migrants. And what is interesting about Indian diaspora is the diversity that we see in India in terms of religion, in terms of caste, in terms of language, in terms of everything. You will see that Indian diaspora is a cross section of the diversity of India. That's the reason why Bhikkhu Parekh, as I have mentioned earlier, called Indian diaspora a community of communities. So it's that diversity that we are talking about. And also when we think about Indian diaspora, not just caste system and religion, but also subnationalism. So being Indian in a foreign country, but also being, say, a Tamilian in a foreign country, or a Kannadiga in a foreign country, or a Bihari or Kashmiri in a foreign country, that subnational identity also matters. So identity is something which is very core to the existence of migrants and diaspora communities. That's also because sometimes the society, the society which they are in, the host societies, they are hostile towards migrants. They are hostile towards diaspora communities. They are hostile towards refugees and asylum seekers. So you have to it becomes a strategy for these diaspora communities, including Indian diaspora communities, to uphold their identity, and having that feeling that home, which is, in this particular case, India, is the comfort for them. So, that is how it becomes promised land. India as a promised land for migrants. And I'm sure, at some point or the other, there is this conversation, or there is this myth of return, or a certainty of return, as in the case of GCC country migrants. This is what, this whole experiences, the whole experiences of migration is what makes them a diaspora. And as I have mentioned, there is within these diasporas, within South Asian diaspora, there is a lot of, diversity and dynamics that we should be, I don't know, we should be researching about. So thank you so much. I hope I made things pretty clear.
Thank you, Divya. I think I was listening you. It was very interesting, and you really conceptualized very well South Asian diaspora. And many of our students, they have doubt actually.
Yeah.
What is South Asian diaspora? And you explained it very well, because that cultural connection is very important.
Yeah.
What you made. And example of Bollywood, food, and all this area, South Asia have a distinctive identity. which actually bind them together outside
Yeah.
India. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you very much. We have actually no time now.
I'm really
So-
sorry for this.
No problem.
It is such a vast topic.
So what we'll do, sorry for all the students, we'll have one more class in future by Divya.
Sir, can you send me this chat section to me so that I'll write all the response? You know, I can do that.
I'm sending right away
Yeah. Okay.
to your WhatsApp. Okay.
Sure. So I'll answer. Sorry for this that I can't really answer your queries that's there in the chat, but I'll be typing and sending the reply, my response to Sahu sir, and he will be sharing them with you.
Okay. So thank you everybody, and